what's going on. I'm connected to my Bluetooth. Let's get right into it. Here we go.
MCU Spider-Man. Spider-Man Brand New Day will release on July 31st of next year. I've built a lot of this channel on talking about the MCU Spider-Man, including a feature-length pitch for what I wanted in the college trilogy. And while I'm not really a Spider-Man channel anymore, there's enough that's changed and enough news about this movie that both excites me and worries me that I can't help but talk about it. You know, I thought I was done making Spider-Man videos, but I don't know what it is. You know, it's like a moth to a flame. I guess I just can't escape it. That was weird. Did you guys hear that? This video is brought to you by Kitsch. Kitsch is here to make quality hair care easy for everyone, with affordable, eco-friendly products designed to fit any routine, most notably with their shampoo and conditioner bars. I was a little skeptical about bar shampoo at first. My hair is really important to me, so even like a bad haircut can ruin my whole year, which is why I don't do it very often. And I'm always a bit scared to change the routine and left off. For those who might not know, Brand New Day was an era of Spider-Man comics from 2008 to 2010. It followed the events of One More Day, which is one of the more infamous books in Spidey's history, in which he sold his marriage with Mary Jane to Mephisto in order to save Aunt May's life, effectively resetting a lot of the growth and development the character has made in the past couple decades and bringing him back to a more brand-friendly status quo. Why they didn't just have him get a divorce and instead went straight for deal with the devil, I couldn't tell you. And so Brand New Day was the 100-issue long run of comics in this new status quo. It wasn't really my favorite era for Spider-Man. I have nothing against Dan Slott or anyone else who's worked on ASM in recent years. I think it was the start of his Mickey Mouseification, which I talked about in my Daredevil video, being this very safe era for the character after the JMS run, which took so many big swings. But there are still a lot of really great stories in there, like the introduction of Mr. Negative. Given that the ending of No Way Home was, for all intents and purposes, an adaptation of One More Day, it only makes sense to follow it up with this. Honestly, I'm all for adapting some of the quote-unquote weaker runs of comics and giving them fresher and newer spins. It's better than trying to adapt the good stuff and making me feel disappointed. I'm looking at you, Love and Thunder. I think it's cool the logo's using the same typeface from that same mid-2000s era. Listen, I know I'm hyper-examining a logo, but when that's all they give us, that's what I'm going to talk about. But who am I kidding? They're going to change it up for something like super boring in like 6 months anyway, like they always do. They always do that. I don't expect this movie to follow the Brand New Day comics beat for beat, or even at all, if I'm being honest. These movies aren't really ever in the business of direct adaptations like Civil War and Born Again, which I've just come to expect, and I'm fine with that. If they follow the home trilogy strategy of naming conventions, I could see them doing something similar with the titles. You could have Brand New Day, and then you could have One More Day, and then something like Final Days, where they brutally murder Peter Parker in his backyard and they can finally do Miles like they clearly want to. But God, this is gonna mess up so many search terms. It's like the Batman. I gotta slap 2005 whenever I want to talk about the show now. Ever since September, we've known that Destin Daniel Cretton was going to be directing this movie, and I think he's a pretty great choice. He's most famous for directing Shang-Chi, and while that movie wasn't perfect or anything, there were definitely still a lot of Marvelisms that held it back. It was still a highlight of that era of Phase 4, and a movie that I overall really liked. Especially in that first half, there's a lot of fantastic action and camera work, and I think it shows Cretton's skills as a director to be able to make something like that within the machine that is Marvel. I don't think John Watts is a bad director or anything. He's shown that he's capable of doing some really cool stuff, especially in No Way Home with all those crazy camera moves. But on the whole, those movies didn't really wow me with how they looked. And based on how Cretton's talking about the character and what makes him so special, I'm excited to see what he's able to bring, and I think we're in good hands here. But that all comes down to whether or not Sony and Marvel will actually let him cook. And that's been my biggest worry with this movie. Reportedly, behind the scenes, there have been some internal debates about what direction to take. No Way Home was a massive, massive success, in part due to the multiverse hype of seeing the other Spider-Man. And while I liked that movie quite a bit, none of that came from the multiverse stuff, and a lot of my enjoyment came from the ending and the status quo that it left us off with. It was such a radical change for this version of the character, and left the door open for so many fun and different possibilities, specifically with a more grounded street-level story. And for a while, it seems like Sony wasn't sure whether or not to go with that grounded take, or to repeat No Way Home's hits and do another high-stakes multiverse movie. It got to a point where there was a legitimate fear that Sony would lose the rights to the character. Part of the licensing deal from the 90s is that Sony has to make a live-action Spider-Man movie every 5 years, or else the rights would go back to Marvel. Compare that to Universal's distribution rights for the Hulk, which very well might last forever. Yeah, we're never getting a Hulk movie ever again, are we? And this whole time, I've been kind of screaming in the back of my head to just shut the fuck up and make a Spider-Man movie already. And if they really wanted to, they could have had their cake and eaten it too. Technically, the correct way to say that is eat your cake and have it too, like as in like you eat your cake but then still have it after you've eaten it. That's like the right way. That's what that saying is supposed to be. But apparently the Unabomber used to say that. A smaller scale. Why did I bring up the? What the fuck's wrong with me? We could have had a smaller scale, grounded Spider-Man movie and that big multiverse fest all within the 5 years it's taken to make this one. I've already talked at length about what I would do with that kind of grounded story. I made a whole hour 45-minute fan fiction about it with popsicle sticks and everything. But I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that I'm kind of sick of the multiverse. Not necessarily the concept of it. It's still a great tool for sci-fi stories, but mostly how it's been used lately to just show off cameos and the different IPs these companies hold. Like keys jingling in front of a baby. Wait, sorry, wrong visual there? Like keys jingling in front of a baby. Wait, hang on, sorry, wrong again. Like keys, there we go. So a little part of me was hoping that Sony was able to get all that out of their system with No Way Home, given that it was one of the first of these types of movies, back when this idea was kind of novel, and now they can do something smaller and simpler, which would feel like kind of a breath of fresh air. I'll be honest though, I have like zero faith in Sony to actually do that. These are the same people who somehow made Spider-Verse, but also Madam Web. One of them being my favorite movie ever, and the other being Spider-Verse.
It's a genetic neuromuscular disorder.
But I don't have a neuromuscular disorder.
This movie's going to be releasing smack dab in the middle of Avengers, Doomsday, and Secret Wars, both of which we know are going to be the big tentpole movies all about the multiverse and the culmination of this saga. So it kind of goes to reason that this movie will be similar. It could very well be something smaller scale. Maybe it'll be like Ant-Man and the Wasp, actually, where that came out after Infinity War but was set before it. And in the post-credits scene, we see how the events of Doomsday affect Spider-Man's world. But realistically, given the time that this movie's releasing and what I'm expecting Doomsday and Secret Wars to cover, it seems more and more likely that this movie's going to be set on Battleworld. For those who don't know, in the original 1984 Secret Wars by Jim Shooter and Mike Zeck, the Beyonder created a planet called Battleworld by piecing together different worlds. Then he transported a team of heroes and villains from throughout the Marvel Universe to fight for his amusement. And then a bunch of other stuff happened. It's a good comic, read that. It's iconic and important for a reason. And then in 2015 Secret Wars by Jonathan Hickman and Assad Ribic, Dr. Doom used the Beyonder's powers to create a new Battleworld, this time in his image that he had complete control over. I fully believe that Doomsday and Secret Wars are going to pull more from the Hickman era than the classic. Doomsday is likely going to be covering the events of Time Runs Out and the Incursions, which was the lead up to Hickman's Secret Wars and had the Avengers have to duke it out with other universes to survive, only instead of being 616 versus the Ultimate Universe, it'll be the MCU versus the Fox Universe. Ending with Robert Downey Jr. creating Battleworld, Secret Wars dealing with all that, and potentially ending with a rebooted universe. A concept that I also have a separate video on. Look at that, I talk so much about the MCU. I talk too much about the MCU, dare I say. But what could a solo Spider-Man movie set on Battleworld even look like? I'm gonna be totally honest. I have no fucking idea. Maybe he's the leader of like an anti-Doom rebellion. That could maybe be fun. Or maybe we're just doing your classic Spider-Verse stuff with the Web of Life and Destiny. I know I just said that I don't care about like multiverse hype fests, but if I see Dakota Johnson in this movie, I'm giving it a 4-hour standing ovation. I love Madam Web so much. I will ride or die for Madam Web. What might be kind of neat and something that I touched on in my MCU reboot video is if they actually pull from the new run on Ultimate Spider-Man by Hickman and Marco Cicchetto. Not directly adapted or anything, but the idea that Peter's life as Spider-Man was taken away from him in this universe. This time by Dr. Doom, and he has to take it back and fight against the street level side while the other characters take care of the big stuff. Which could be a sort of neat middle ground between the street level and the multiverse. Either way, this whole thing still feels like a weird follow-up to the way No Way Home ended and the implications that decision left us with, how Peter was abandoning the identity of Peter Parker and focusing entirely on being Spider-Man to cope with the loneliness and pain of losing his friends. But I don't know, I guess that's just how the cookie crumbles when you're dealing with the cinematic universe stuff, you know? One thing that immediately has me a little bit worried is the costume. I love how the suit looked in the final moments of No Way Home, but it seems like he's going to be getting a new one with this movie, which is kind of a bummer that lasted only like 30 seconds. But I get it, we need to sell toys, I guess. If only there was like a very famous black costume that he could discover or something while he's literally on Battleworld. That No Way Home suit was 100% VFX for that swing, so hopefully they're just talking about the transition from CG to practical in literally making a new suit, like with the jump from Civil War to Homecoming. Technically the same costume, but just a couple little changes. If he were to get a fully new suit, that would be fine and everything. I just hope it's all small stuff like different logos or colors, and we don't get a bunch of lines slapped onto it for no reason. Seriously, I am so tired of modern Spider-Man designs just throwing shit on there to break up the arms. He's fine without that. One of the most recent and honestly weirdest bits of news from this movie was that Sadie Sink of Stranger Things fame has been cast as a major character, and this has led to a lot of people speculating on who she'd be playing. Now, she could be playing a newer version of Mary Jane Watson as opposed to Zendaya's Michelle Jones Watson from the Home trilogy, and I really hope this isn't the case for 3 main reasons. 1. It's stupid. And 2, I've always said that Zendaya could be an amazing Mary Jane depiction with the right writing. The Michelle character was super underdeveloped, and I wish that they had just kept the name Mary Jane. Plus, she and Tom are literally engaged and already have that natural chemistry, so it'd be weird to just waste that. Not to mention, third point, it's stupid. Another character I've seen people think she's playing is Gwen Stacy. I don't necessarily think that's the case, although it would be very funny to continue the trend of redheads playing Gwen. I've also seen some people think she might be playing Jean Grey, and this movie is our first introduction to the MCU's X-Men. And you know me, I'm a sucker for all things X-Men, almost to a fault, but I don't think that's going to be the case here. Jean is one of the most important members of the X-Men, literally a founder, so it'd be weird to try to introduce her in a Spider-Man movie. I think she could maybe be playing Sarah Arrett, who was the original Jackpot in the comics. She first appeared in the Brand New Day era, so that's not totally out of the question. what could be fun is if she's playing Angelica Jones Firestar, and we end up getting a live-action version of Spider-Man as Amazing Friends. So then you'd have Iceman, who's also a founding member of the X-Men, and then you have the exact same problem, so probably not. If they're doing multiverse stuff, maybe she ends up playing an older version of Mayday Parker, and the story could be about him meeting his future daughter and her inspiring him to live his life again. I feel like there's a joke like everything but the kitchen sink in here somewhere, but I can't figure out what it is. Let me know down in the comments how you would make that joke. As for what villain they go with, there are so many they could pick from. Spider-Man's rogues gallery is massive, and we've barely scratched the surface of them in the movies. If it ends up being a grounded story, I've been dying to see Scorpion get proper treatment on the big screen. It's still crazy to me that they set him up on Homecoming and just did nothing with him. I know there were rumors about Tom Hardy getting involved, and Spider-Man would fight his Venom, but it doesn't look like that's happening anymore. And on the other hand, if this is that full-blown multiverse movie, then I think someone like Morlun is an obvious pick. The Spider-Verse movies don't seem to want to touch him, and that's kind of understandable. I'm not huge on all the Spider-Totem stuff with all the Inheritors, but this could be a cool chance to adapt that and maybe make it better. Maybe during the events of Doomsday and the Incursions, the Inheritors are more easily able